Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is J.A. Jance. J.A. is the New York Times bestselling author of the J.P. Beaumont series, the Joanna Brady series, the Ali Reynolds series, 5 interrelated thrillers about the Walker family, and 1 volume of poetry. Born in South Dakota and brought up in Bisbee, Arizona, she lives with her husband in Seattle, Washington. Welcome, J.A.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. I love at the beginning of your book, it talks about, there's like an incredible list of all the J.A. Jance books there are. So once you get hooked on J.A., you've got a lot of reading to catch up on. So,
well, I started writing I started writing novels in 1982 and started working on the first Detective Beaumont book in 1983. So I've been writing books at a rate of 1.6 books a year, and it usually takes me 6 months to write a book. Blessing of the Lost Girls is a huge exception to that because I wrote that book from start to finish in 2 months flat.
Wow. Well, it's a very powerful book. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about it? And also, I love what they've done with the cover here. It's so beautiful.
Well, I particularly like the dream catcher in Lost because this is a book about murdered and missing Indigenous women. That's big news today, but it was a reality of life when I was on the reservation as a teacher librarian in the late 60s and early 70s. And the first Walker book, this makes number 6 now. It says in the bio that it's 5, but this makes number 6.
Got it.
When I wrote the first Walker book, Hour of the Hunter, which was published in 1990, that was a murdered Tohono O'odham girl from the reservation. And in the book, her killer is captured, but is actually sent to prison, but he actually gets a slap on the wrist. And in Hour of the Hunter, he's back out and looking for the people who put him away. But just as an aside, some people tell me the Walker books are too dark, but I really had fun with Hour of the Hunter because in 1964, I wasn't allowed in the creative writing program at the University of Arizona because, as the professor told me, you're a girl. Girls become teachers or nurses, boys become writers. So in Hour of the Hunter, the crazed killer turns out to be a former professor of creative writing from the University of Arizona. And boy, did I have fun making him evil.
Yes, I'm sure. I mean, tell us about that. I mean, you're a pioneer, female author in this genre when people said no to you, I'm sure, to women.
Well, a lot of people said no, but I had the dream of becoming a writer from the time I was in 2nd grade on. And I guess determination is my middle name. My first husband, who was allowed in that creative writing program and never published anything, told me shortly after we married that there was only going to be one writer in our family, and he was it. So I didn't actually start writing until after I was divorced, single mom, full-time job selling life insurance. The time I had to write was 4 o'clock in the morning until 7 when I got the kids up to go to school. So no amount of no's stopped me. And once I sat down to write that first book, I was on fire, and I've been on fire ever since.
Amazing.
But I think part of it, I've realized just in the past few days when people have asked me, well, why did you put those legends in the books? Well, when I started writing the Walker family books, of which this is number 6, I wanted to bring the reservation and what reservation life was like to people who would never come there.
Right.
I was a K through 12 librarian, and I started being a librarian when I only had 6 units of library science under my belt. And so I was being a librarian while I was taking classes to become a librarian. And it was easy because in every class, I knew exactly what I needed to learn.
Right. Yeah.
In the spring of that first year on the reservation, the class I took was a children's literature class. And that was where the teacher had us stand up and tell stories. And it was like, I found where I was supposed to be and what I was meant to do. So for those 4 years, I told 26 stories a week in K through 6 classrooms. And many of the stories that I told are the regular ones we all heard in school. Little engine that could make way for ducklings. But I also learned and told the stories of the desert people. And so when I began writing those books, I wanted to weave those legends into the fabric of the story. And I've done that in all 6 of the books.
Yeah, they're beautiful. I mean, it is such a strong cultural element in those stories. I think it plays beautifully with the story. And there are so many rich characters in this that I know come from, other places. We have Walker, we have Joanna Brady, and now her daughter, and there's just so much sort of wonderful stuff. And like you said, you started writing these books before sort of Lost Girls and those things were really called attention to. So tell us about your time in the reservation and how did you grew up in Arizona, so that there's obviously a lot of indigenous people, but how did you end up there?
I grew up in the southeast corner of Arizona in Cochise County, and there was never a mention of Cochise, the chief. There was a hill called Geronimo, but it was as though the school system had just erased that whole aspect of history. And so when I went to the reservation, the librarian quit 3 days before school was supposed to start, and they offered me the job to come because my husband already had a contract there. And you drive to cells on this flat plain, and then just before town, you go up over this little pass. And whenever we went over that pass each morning on our way to school, I felt this sense of being an outsider and of not belonging. I made friends on the reservation. I talked one woman she was 28 years old. She had 5 kids. She had a drunk for a husband, a much older husband. And I talked her I tried to encourage her. I said, you're really smart. You could go to college. And I said, why don't you go to night school and just take one class and see how you do? So we talked about it, and she said she would go. And the next day was registration, and we planned to go into town and get her registered and come back. The next day she came to school with 2 black eyes. Her husband had beaten the crap out of her. We closed the library that day. We talked all that day. And finally, at 4:30 in the afternoon, she said, I want to show my kids a different path. I'll go. So we went in, we got her registered. Melissa never got her own degree, but her daughter, Vivian, was elected tribal chairman. She earned her BA degree. She earned her master's degree, and she's working on her dissertation. And of course, she's done all the hard work, but I feel as though I had that tiny contribution.
Of course.
And so my next aide in the library was Pauline Hendricks. And when I left, she said, I'm leaving too, because the next person, this is our library, but the next person isn't going to act like it's my library too. And so she got a job as a social worker. And she discovered that the trading post on the reservation had worked with the previous social worker and changed the addresses of welfare recipients to the high store. So the checks went to the high store. They took what was owed to them and gave the change back to the recipient. So Pauline put a stop to that. But when I left, she gave me a little Indian basket. It's an owl. It's sitting right over there on the mantle. And she said, if you can't make it with your own tribe, you can always come back here.
That's amazing.
So I feel this attachment.
Of course.
That I think that love shows through.
It does.
But of course, Dan Pardee is also a stranger to this reservation because he is Apache.
Yeah.
And in Tohono O'odham, the word O'op means both enemy and Apache simultaneously. But all the other tribes around Arizona, whatever the word they use for Apache is also the word they use for enemy.
That's interesting, right?
Those Apaches were troublemakers everywhere.
I love that the medicine woman aspect and the chairman, and there's all these beautiful sort of, and I think, obviously this is a displaced and, underprotected community that you've been, writing about since the early 80s, which is because now missing Indigenous women has gained, like you said, so much attention in the last, few years in particular, but you've been doing this for 40 years, right?
Yes.
40 years.
Well, I didn't write the first Walker book until 1990.
Okay, so 33 years. It's still a really long time.
But the high point of my career was when I was invited to do a signing on the reservation, and they had young people come out and do a circle dance. Being in the circle is a big issue in most of the Indigenous societies that I know of. And so I was the guest of honor at this event, and they brought a group of, when we were on the reservation, my husband went to the wine dance and danced and sat in the circle. I was at home with a baby, so I didn't get to go. And then until the time he died, he read my nose in the fact that he got to sit in the circle and I didn't. And so at this event, the MC said, okay, a group of young people are going to come out. They're going to do a circle dance. And please don't take any photos of the circle dance. But when we open it up for social dancing, then you're welcome to take pictures and join the circle. So I'm sitting there watching those kids dancing, and I'm thinking, Judy, you've been pissed about not being in the circle for all that time. Isn't it about time you put your money where your mouth is? And so when they opened it for social dancing, and I stood up and went down to join the circle, they gave me a standing ovation. But that isn't the best part of it. When we got to that event, it was in March. So there were a lot of snowbirds, and snowbirds had come all the way out to the reservation to see this. And so I was down there dancing, and I was thinking, my life isn't going to get any better than this. And then those Milgon women, the Anglo women from all those out of state, they came down and danced in the circle too.
Get the shivers.
That is the high point of my literary career. I've never had anything that meant.
I'll bet. Well, I mean, and another thing about this early writing is that you were protecting like women. You're talking about sort of the power of women and the strength of women at a time when, we were largely dismissed as you were to be like, you're limited to very few jobs and to be home with kids. And, so you were sort of charging ahead with this, with this empowering yourself and therefore showing younger women what could be done.
Yes, it feels, I don't feel like a pioneer. I feel like I'm doing what I was always meant to do, but maybe that's what pioneers are.
I mean, by following your own passion, you opened doors for people who followed, not just Native American, indigenous people, but also, other writers, I'm sure, once you sort of proved it could be done. Now, there's a couple of organizations in the book that you mentioned. One is MIP, and one is Name Us. Can you tell about those?
MIP I made up, but
okay.
Name Us is a real thing. And I try to put that into the books because people who have lost relatives, that is a database that they're able to access and they can activate, they can put in their own information, their own DNA profile. They can put in a victim's dental records. So law enforcement can access, Name Us, and so can regular people.
That's powerful. We can help if we were missing people.
But MIP, I decided I was going to create a federal agency, and I know there is one, but I had more fun creating mine.
Of course. And you probably were ahead of the curve with them. So do you feel like, you've seen this, you've had experience with reservations and indigenous people over all these years. Do you feel like there is progress around, protecting indigenous women and solving cases of lost girls?
Well, I think there's more attention to it, and I think they simply have to, how people get lost, how the cases don't get solved is this morass of jurisdictional disputes where nobody ever takes responsibility. In 1970, see, over the years, God has given me several lemons and I've turned them into lemonade. And in 1970, my first husband and I were stalked for 60 days by a serial killer who killed people at 20 minutes after 2 on the 22nd day of the month. And he killed, he forced a woman off the highway at gunpoint, shot her, raped her in front of her 2 small children, and left her to die. And then he gave my husband a ride home to our house an hour later. So we got sucked into that investigation because when we heard they were looking for a guy in a green car and something about 2 little kids, my husband said, well, I wonder if that's the guy who gave us a ride home. And actually it was. That case was solved because it was an Anglo killed by another Anglo on the reservation. And Pima County, Jack Lyons, Pima County's chief homicide cop, took control of that investigation. But if it had been an Indian who had been killed on the reservation, it would have been either the FBI or the tribal police, and nothing would have happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Because the tribal, I mean, the tribal police have jurisdiction only within the reservation, right? So it's a trick of where something happens and
And
um
where something happens, who's involved. So in Montana, you'd be amazed at how many Indigenous women die of
domestic abuse.
no, not well, yes, but they just go out into the woods somewhere off the reservation and they just die because they get too cold. I can't think of the right being too
Yeah,
cold. Right?
exposure. They die of exposure.
See,
You're welcome.
but sometimes words
Of
just.
course, that happens to all of us. I'm actually in Montana. That's where I live. I'm in Bozeman, Montana, and I have heard about I mean, there's a lot of that we hear about. But and why do you suppose that is? Are they just trying to escape or
Well, who wants to have an open unsolved case? So let's just ignore it. It'll go away.
oh, call it that. I see. That's just a blanket statement for when women, disappear. They probably walked into the woods and died of exposure,
He just walked away. Yes, they got tired of it and they just walked away.
which really doesn't happen ever.
Hardly ever. Hardly ever.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just all swept under the rug. Yeah. That's just
But
so brutal.
I'd like to go back to blessings for a minute. We're way
Yes.
subject, but this is fun. I'm sorry.
No, this is your show. You talk, tell us.
Write another book. When a friend called and told me about a man named James. James was a Sioux, a member of the Rosebud Sioux, working in a small community in Oregon when he had an encounter with a guy who was known as the Boxcar Killer. And the Boxcar Killer roamed the West in the 90s, riding trains, and he did hate crimes by pushing Native Americans under moving trains.
Yeah.
James in Oregon had an encounter with him. He was pushed under a train, dragged for a mile and a half that it took for the engineer to stop the train. Cops up, pronounced him dead, zipped him into a body bag, and took him to the morgue in the basement of the community hospital. And when he, at the hospital, it was a small town, and one of the nurses in the hospital knew he was Sioux. And when she got off shift, she went downstairs to wash his hair. And when she unzipped the body bag, his arm came out because he wasn't dead. So he went straight from the morgue to the OR. It took countless operations and hospital stays to sort of duct tape him back together. And during his hospital stays, where he became a paraplegic, he lost the use of his right hand. He had to learn to speak again. He had to learn to read again. Before he was able to read, one of my friends and fans volunteered at that hospital, and she would go to his room and read to him. And because she loved my Walker books more than anything, she read those to him. James recovered enough that he spent the next 20 years counseling disaffected Native American youth in the Portland area. But in 2021, shortly before his death, he called Loretta and he told her, tell your friend to write more Walker books. There aren't enough Indian heroes.
Yeah.
And this is that book. And when you encounter the character of
John, yeah,
you know that James has now become an Indian hero.
Yes, and you're talking about the chairman, and it is such a moving character, and the relationship between he and the medicine woman. Now the name is escaping me. Yes, it's so powerful that they, sort of mutual respect of their their skills and their the powers that they have. But that's an incredible story. And I mean, the fact that somebody could be dragged for a mile and a half and survive is just, I love that you put that into a book.
Well, so that's in the book. The other thing is I live with my characters. My characters have all aged as I've aged, and they've moved through their lives. We met Jennifer Brady, Joanna Brady's, in Desert Heat as a 9-year-old little girl who had just had a smidgen of sex ed at Greenway School. And on the eve of her parents' 10th anniversary, she counted on her fingers and figured out there weren't quite enough months. And asked her mother if she was a preemie. Of course, she wasn't a preemie. The wedding was late. She was right on. But now we see Jenny, who grew up thinking she wanted to be a vet, but she's lived with her mother in law enforcement. And as a college, she changed her major to criminal justice. And she plays an invaluable role.
She really does.
In this book. And she really comes into her own. She becomes involved in this case, but she doesn't want her involvement to be based on her connection with her mother. Right. She wants it to be based on her own skills. And it's wonderful to see her growing up.
Yeah. I would expect her to be around in future books, because she really does. Well, there's a little hint there at the end that we might see her again in the future, which is really, really fun. So you have all these characters, J.A. Do you have some sort of massive map of all these? Are they all living inside your brain? How do you keep track?
They all live in my brain. I do have a name file, and I use that to keep track of Dan Pardier's Green Eyes, for example.
Yes.
And I moved that name file. It's the name file in one title, and then when it's time to write the next book, I go to the new file and drag the name file over, so I have access to all that information. But for the most part, those people are all in my head. I know them. And when I just finished writing the next Beaumont book, and within a few paragraphs of writing about Beau in the first person, his books are always in the first person because he wouldn't do anything in the third person. In third person, that guy was dead in the water. But as soon as I was writing the first Beaumont book, and I had been trying to get it to come to order for about 6 months, and I finally sent my kids to camp on spring break, and I was going to go down to Portland and spend 5 days with a friend from my days in the insurance business. But I got on the train with a stack of blue line notebooks and a bunch of ballpoint pens. And as the train pulled out of the King Street station, I thought, well, what would happen if I wrote this book through the detective's point of view? So I got out a pad of paper and a pen, and I wrote, she might have been a cute kid once. That was hard to tell now. She was dead. Well,
and that was Beau. That was Beau.
So as soon as I wrote those sentences, I was on the backside of Magnolia Bluff. I was walking around a crime scene. I was seeing what he saw, walking in his shoes, hearing what he heard, but I was also hearing what's going on inside his head. And actually, this is the 40th anniversary of the time in March in 1983 when I wrote those first words in Beaumont number 1. And I've just finished writing Beaumont number 26.
Oh my. So tell me, this is it's a magical thing to hear, and I think as writers we experience this, but as non-writers, it's impossible to understand. But describe to us, what happens when you're when you're in a book? You said, like, Bo would only speak to you in first person. He wasn't going to have anything to do with third person. But, obviously Pardee and Brady, they're all Walker. These books are third person. So what do you think happens? Like, how does the magic happen for you?
Well, the magic happens. I, I, the magic doesn't happen in an outline. That outlining in Mrs. Watkins' sixth grade geography class, I hated outlining then. I hate it to this day. So the magic happens. I generally start with somebody dead. And I spend the rest of the book trying to find out who did it and how come. In Blessing, we start out meeting this guy who looks like this perfectly ordinary but somewhat mysterious snowbird, and his neighbors at the RV park have no idea that he's a serial killer. Mm-hmm. No idea. And every time he has this wonderful set of maracas right out there on his patio table, and whenever he's shaking them, they have no idea that they're actually dealing with trophies.
Yes. No. That's a fabulous. We're not going to talk anymore about that, because you have to read the book and figure out what those are, which I thought was so clever, because hiding them in plain sight. It was really, I loved that.
But I do love the little old lady who brought that guy down.
Me too.
She did it. She did it.
Yeah, I mean, you can't discount little old ladies. We're attentive. We're observant women. Good for her.
And that's one of my main advantages. I was 6 feet tall in 7th grade.
Wow. Yeah.
6 classes. I was smart, so I was a social disaster. So I was always an outsider. Always. And so what that made me was an observer as opposed to a participant. And that has served me in good stead as a writer, because I notice things that go right over other people's heads. My favorite scene in Blessing of the Lost Girls is when Jenny's acquaintance, a young woman who
Deb,
she was about to get in trouble with this sort of sketchy boyfriend when she was attacked and was actually saved by the sketchy boyfriend. Mm-hmm. But Jenny can see the connection between the dead girl in her mother's jurisdiction and what happened in Albuquerque. So he pulls that string together. But Jenny so the assault was never reported to the police because Deb, didn't want her parents to find out about the sketchy boyfriend.
Right.
And she says, you need to go tell your mother, because your mother will be in your corner. So Deb takes her advice, and that scene between Deb and her mother is one that I have goosebumps on my legs just thinking that scene.
I was very powerful.
Because she realized her parents aren't the people she always assumed them to be. And when her mother tells her, that thank God for that boyfriend, he was sketchy, but he saved you. But moving on, when you go back to school and you're looking for a boyfriend, look for the guy who comes to class every day.
Right.
The guy who isn't flashy. Yeah. Look for the guy who doesn't think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Somebody who'll get a job and bring home his paycheck. And I thought, boy, I wish somebody had made me listen to that advice when I was 18.
I mean, seriously, we all needed that kind of mother. Yeah, it's so true. Well, and it's and I wondered, there's something that's divulged there that in that scene that we won't talk about, but did that occur to you as you were writing the scene, the mother's, her confession, or did you know that already?
I learned all of that the hard way, because when I was 18, I brought home my first boyfriend and introduced him to my parents. And my parents said, he's a raging alcoholic. And I said, oh, you're just teetotalers. What do you know? And so I spent 18 years of my life trying to prove them wrong. I finally divorced him. He died of chronic alcoholism at age 42, a year and a half after I divorced him. But all those years when I was married to him and I wasn't supposed to be being a writer, after he'd be passed out in his recliner at night, I was there on the hill by myself, 7 miles to the nearest neighbor and or telephone. So I jotted off little pieces of poetry.
Yeah.
And put them away and never looked at them again until after he died. I put them in the strong box. And after the fire, my book of poetry it's the story of that journey with that first husband.
Yeah.
And after he died and I looked at the poetry again, I was shocked. It was like seeing my life in instant replay, because the creative part of me understood the relationship was doomed far before I was willing to see it. And so after the fire is this little book. It's a lovely little hardback because it has fireweed on the cover. Fireweed only grows after a forest fire. It only blooms after a forest fire. But the title poem, and after the fire, goes like this. I have touched the fire. It burned me, but I knew I lived. It seared me, but it made me whole. He called me. I went gladly, though I saw the rocks, fell laughing through the singeing air. I have known the fire. I'll live with nothing rather than with less. The flame is out. There's nothing left but ash.
Wow, that is really, really powerful.
And when people read that, when being involved with an addictive personality is so isolating and you feel like you're the only one who could possibly be that stupid. And when people in those situations are given that book, it's incredibly empowering. I hear from them, and those emails from people that have been helped by that book really, really touch me. But here's the thing, I have zero regrets. In terms of husband material, my first husband was a dead loss. But from the point of view of a murder mystery writer, the guy was a gold mine. So
right. You had to go, it's like you said, you had to go through that fire to be who you are. And I agree. I agree. And this is the first time I'll say this on the air, but I'm going through a divorce. We've been married 30 years, and I don't regret a thing other than knowing that I am done.
I was in the throes of that. Well, I hadn't actually filed for a divorce yet. I came home from church one Sunday, and he had covered the doorknobs with olive oil because someone told him that would drive the evil spirit out of the house. The evil spirit, I had brought in a roommate because it's hard to hire a babysitter when you have a drunk living in the house.
Right.
And use the drunk for a babysitter. So I came home and I couldn't get inside, and I found out, and he staggered off into the bedroom, and I went through the house, and then I went out to the backyard. The bottle shattered as it hit the wall. I stood with arm upraised and knew that I had smashed it. It could as easily have been his head. The anger raged around me like a roaring flood. I wanted victims, and it wasn't hard to flush them from their hidden lairs. I broke the bottles one by one. I'm missing a line. I broke the bottles one by one with cool deliberation. By the very act of breaking them, I certified their victory. I took him to the doctor then, not because he needed it. I did.
I mean, really, it's so powerful. I would look forward to exploring the poetry. That just, and it amazes me that you can just, even on the spot, just that is so deeply ingrained in you that you can pull those out. The experience was clearly so monumental in your existence, and I can imagine that women are very helped, and men too, by those words, because we all need to know that somebody else has been through what we're going through.
And that you can come out on the other side. That, of course, the happily ever after part of this story is that in 1985, the book came out as poetry. That After the Fire came out initially in 1984 as a little paperback chapbook. And I was invited to do a poetry reading of that at a widowed retreat where I met a man whose first wife, Lynn, died on the same day of the year, 2 years after my husband died.
Wow.
So we struck up a conversation based on that coincidence on the 21st of June. We got married on the 21st of December.
Mm-hmm.
Our 5 kids were not so fine, but 37 years later, we're fine. And
That's amazing.
He says my first husband was so bad that it's made his life perfect.
I mean, right? Comparison. That's one. I'm glad to hear that too. These are the stories that we share, the way we prop each other up, and we need more of that. I think especially women. So I'm so grateful. So tell us a little bit about what's coming now. I'm assuming there'll be another Walker story, but right now the next thing is, tell us.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. There were 7 kids in our family. My mother cooked 3 meals a day for 9 people without benefit of a microwave or a mechanical dishwasher. And she had some rules, Ebby's rules. You eat a little bit of everything. You eat everything on your plate and no dessert until your plate is clean. So I brought that to my literary life, and I'm not allowed to think about the next book until I clean my plate of the one I'm working on.
Perfect.
So I just finished writing Beaumont number 26. It's called Den of Iniquity. I had to get it done and get the editing done before this book tour started. And I did. It was in New York Sunday a week ago.
Congratulations.
But it's, and again, Beaumont is out walking with his next door neighbor and their 2 dogs. Beau has his second Irish Wolfhound, and the neighbor, Hank Mitchell, has this obnoxious little Chihuahua named Mr. Bean. And so he comes home from this walk, and there's a car in the driveway, and he goes down to the car, and his grandson steps out. His grandson lives 9 hours away, and it's 2:30 in the afternoon on a school day. So what's up? It turns out that the grandson's parents are getting a divorce. His mother has moved out. His father has moved his pregnant girlfriend into the house. And Kyle has run away to come see if he can live with Beau and Mel in Bellingham. Talk about having your quiet existence totally uprooted. And so watching Beau's and Mel's reaction to having this young man come into their lives was really rewarding for me. I loved writing that book.
Well, you have such a passion for writing. It's so evident in the way your storytelling and the way you talk about the writing, that it's been the thing you've loved and cared for, and you obviously work at it really, really hard. It's amazing.
When I was in college, Bisbee was only 100 miles away from Tucson, where I was going to school. And my mother still had 4 kids at home. But once a week, she would sit down and write me a letter telling telling me what was going on back home. So I post a weekly blog. It's on my website, jajance.com/blog. And it's a window on my world. It's the weekly letter I write to my fans. Sometimes I talk about books. A lot of time I talk about writing. Sometimes I talk about my fish pond. You know, you never you never can tell with me. But during the pandemic, I tried to consciously to have every one of those blogs be a little bit of something uplifting, something to make people smile, something to make them laugh, whatever. Do you see that picture? Oh, well, that's next to the pea pads. Let's not even talk about that. That's Rusty Warren, and I was impeached as the song leader of my dorm at the University of Arizona for teaching the girls to sing "Roll Me Over in the Clover" at dinner time. Roll me over in the clover, roll me over, lay me down, and do it again. And that was the Rusty Warren song. And she was the one who came up with the words "knockers up." And in one of my Ali books, I used that terminology, and it came to Rusty Warren's attention, and she wrote to me, and that's how come I have a picture of her and a 45 RPM record of "Roll Me Over in the Clover."
Oh God, I love that story. I love that. That is, it's so amazing. Jay, I'm so grateful for your time today. I love hearing. I feel like I need to now go back and start all these series from the very beginning and read with you. And you are really impressive.
There are what I call IORs. Those are in order readers.
Yes.
And on my website, you can find a book listed, the downloadable one that lists all the books in all the series in chronological order. When I first started, they put them in alphabetical order, and that didn't help anybody.
Well, but you know, I have to say, I mean, this is my first Walker book, but I did not feel like, I know sometimes I feel like when I'm in the middle of a series, I feel like a little disoriented, but this actually worked very well for me as a standalone. You do a beautiful job of, you know, I'm sure readers who know these characters didn't feel like it was too much explanation, but also for those of us new, it felt very fluid. So I think we could all pick up any book anywhere in your series.
You see Diana Ladd as she is now.
Yeah.
In Hour of the Hunter, she was a young widow with a 5-year-old child.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of why the characters seem so real to me, is I've lived with them as they've changed.
Right.
When Bo started out in 1983, he was a drunk. You know, you're supposed to write what you know. And I happen to know a lot about drinking.
Yes, it sounds like you did.
It wasn't until 4 books later that my readers started pointing out that they thought Bo had a drinking problem.
Interesting.
And he went into treatment in book number 8. So there are a lot more books with him in recovery than with him drinking. But I still have people who tell me they liked him better when he was drunk.
Well, I mean, that's the drunk part is probably fun for some, but not for everyone, right? Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I mean, congratulations on all your success, and thank you for being, you know, continuing to write these incredible stories. I mean, you are so clearly so loved, and I look forward to your blog. I'm going to check that out because that is it's so fun to get. I think so many readers love to hear what authors are doing. So we'll send them to jajance.com/blog and check it out. In the meantime, everyone, I'm sure we'll look forward to the next book. We won't make you talk too much about what's coming next, but we'll look forward to Bo and then whatever follows.
Thank you. This has really been fun.
Oh, it's so fun. And you're such a fabulous storyteller. Really. Everyone, this is Killer Women with Jance, who is just a superstar. And if you didn't just love hearing her stories, she's amazing. I'm Danielle Girard, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.